we have no long-term planning. Even if we could say we were justified to going into this war against Saddam, what were our plans for the future? We had
well,
nothing.
Here we may disagree. I think we have long-term planning. I think the United States, and in recent years with the help of the Israelis, and in more recent years with the help of the Saudis and the other Arab establishment powers, has a very long-term plan for the Middle East. We stay in charge. We allow no coalitions to build up. We allow no party to develop weapons of mass destruction. We keep each state feuding against each other. We arm the Israelis so that they can take care of anything that we can't take care of. We keep the royal regimes in power, providing them with money, torture apparatus, military training, whatever's required. We recycle their oil, petrodollars, to our banks and our economy, and we force them to sell us huge quantities of oil at very low prices rather than pump our own oil at higher prices. I think we have a long-term strategy, no, but it's not a peace strategy.
No, but the long-term strategy in the war against Saddam, I mean, we should have had some kind of an opposition, if we really wanted some kind of an opposition built up to take over, and our goal should have been to get to remove him then, if it was our real goal.
I think our goal was to remove him if the price was reasonable, but the price was too high, and so we fell back on an alternate position to isolate him, to weaken him, to bring about a false Israeli-Palestinian arrangement, and to strengthen the bonds of the royal regimes to ourselves and, more recently, to the Israelis, so that the region is now stabilized by authoritarian dictatorial regimes, all feuding and jealous and suspicious of each other, and all looking to Washington and now to Israel to stay in power.
That's a new one.
Yes, but the Israelis are very clever. They've manipulated a situation where 3.5 million Jews, it's almost 4 now, 4 million with the Soviet Union's addition, are able to control that region on behalf of their Western mentor, and working in tandem with the large segments of the American Jewish community, Jewish American community. We won't get into that debate.
We won't go into that.
So that's the region we live in, but I want you to do a little predicting. Don't worry, we won't hold, nobody can foresee exactly what's going to happen, but where is this going to lead in the next 10 to 20 years? You say the peace process is a sham. Well, where do you expect things to go? Is it unfair of me to ask that of the man who's written all these books with all these predictions?
You make so many predictions down the line for so long, and then you suddenly run out of...
you want to stop while you're ahead. Is that it?
Yeah. I can't say here comes the Middle East, because it's not going to come as far as peace is concerned. And I think the dream of the Palestinians and Dr. Shafi and others for a two-state solution for the moment is out the window. There's no reasonable hope that the United States will reverse its position.
So there'll be more terrorism, more tension, no peace, but also no war.
No outright. No, I don't think there'll be any. I can't see between whom. As I say, I don't think. I think the Arab leadership is not strong enough to move the docile populace into more struggles. The anti-Zionist elements in the Arab world are not going to come forward. They want to stay away from everything. They're thinking of trade. They're sending missions or trying to get missions started.
Yeah, but when you say they, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't you referring to a narrow elite?
A narrow elite?
That works with the royal families in Jordan and in Saudi Arabia and in Kuwait, and also to a very narrow business elite in Egypt?
And a big business elite in the United States.
And Israel.
The almighty dollar, no matter how declining, is still the #1 search of all those people out there, the #1 goal.
Isn't the larger question, are these regimes and this arrangement viable in the long run? Do you expect these regimes to keep power?
Well, at least for 25 years.
You think the situation is stable?
I don't think the situation is stable, but they're used to instability. Even the regime like Saudi Arabia, they're more stable than most. They've existed under the rule of the Said family, but even they are having trouble suppressing. There's a movement, I don't know whether it's placed in Europe, but in the country itself. I haven't been in Saudi Arabia in 5-6 years, I don't know. But I've talked to Saudis, and things are not that all quiet there.
To say the least. They're arresting and torturing clergy. They're arresting and torturing intellectuals, university professors. You don't hear about this because there is no due process over there. There is no free press over there. They're threatening anyone who stands in the way of... I'll tell you a little story of my own. I have a few stories too. I was there in '91, before the war, actually, during the build-up to the war. It was late at night. I just
in Riyadh or
I was in Jeddah.
Jeddah.
And I just given a talk at the newspaper at the time, which was publishing the weekly column that I was writing then. And it was midnight. And I thought I was going to get a ride back to my hotel, and instead the editor tells me he'd like to take me to a meeting. You know how it is there. They start about midnight, 12:30,
right,
and go on because most of them don't have to work the next day anyway. So I get there, and the room is huge. It's like just a huge room, bigger than most people's houses. And they're all sitting around in their thobes, and the discussion begins, and we're talking about what's happening, American policy, Israel, Palestinians, the whole thing. Finally, a gentleman across the room, I'm obviously condensing the story, he looks up, he hasn't said a word all night, I've been there for an hour already, takes a puff on his pipe, opens his mouth, it's perfect English, obviously American educated, obviously bright, and all he says was, "Mr. Brzezinski, we're so glad you've come this evening. We're so glad to have you with us this evening. But please, let me correct you on one very important matter." I thought all hell's going to break loose. This was his way of, telling me that my ideas weren't very welcome. Instead, all he said was, "A number of times this evening, I heard you use the word dignity. Please understand when you leave us in a few days, the word dignity no longer exists in the dictionary of the Arabs." He said it all.
Right.
He knew he couldn't talk about the war, the king, the royal family,
Right.
the repression,
Right.
the American invasion. I mean, the king didn't invite the American army there. The American army told him we were coming. That was part of our arrangement. But they have dignity. Those who have money and wealth, there's not much reason for them to risk it all. But they make an occasional comment. Those who don't, which of course is the great majority of the Egyptians or the Palestinians and even of the Saudis, they would like to see change, but it's very difficult to bring about change.
I remember being at a similar big place. Did you ever get to the Equestrian Club in Jeddah?
I don't think so.
It's the club, and I had lunch with 7 assistant ministers, who all of them educated in the U.S., and I put forth a very humble opinion. Don't you think you ought to commit yourself to helping the anti-Zionist forces in the United States? I thought I said something down with the king. I said, "You're American educated. You know the strength of Zionism. You, above all people." "Oh, that's not our baby. We don't want to touch it. That's yours, Dr. Lilienthal. You worry about that."
It's worse. For the last 10 years, led by the Saudi ambassador, Prince Bandar, here in Washington, the Saudi establishment has gone into collusion with the Zionist lobby. We're not just talking about refusing to help the Palestinians or to speak up against. We're talking about they've actually gone to work with them because it's in their interest to stabilize the region through power. And they know that Israel represents power, not just military power, but political power here in the United States.
And they know that a Palestinian state would really set in motion threats to overthrow the regime.
They like that Yasser Arafat has secret police. They like that they torture Palestinians. They like that there's no democracy and no freedom in occupied Palestine, call it reservations or whatever you will. That's completely consistent with how they run their country.
Probably.
Completely consistent with what they do, and sort of takes the pressure off them, takes the eyepiece off them. This is Mideast Realities. We're here with Dr. Alfred Lilienthal, and we will be right back in just a moment. But now, the Mideast Realities lie of the week. This week's headline, why not simply let them vote? Here's what Mr. Tayyib Abdul Rahim, the General Secretary of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, has to say. Quote, the Palestinian Authority cabinet denounces the Libyan government's measures against our Palestinian people, which violate Arab ethics and mutual interests of the two brotherly peoples, unquote. Now notice, even Mr. Abdul Rahim doesn't call it the Palestinian National Authority. And he might as well skip the cabinet word as well. Whatever, imagine those who have totally sold out the more than half of the Palestinian people still living in refugee camps or in exile, now attempting to speak for them and come to their defense as the Palestinian Authority. Mr. Abdul Rahim, if they are your people, why aren't they allowed to vote in the upcoming Israeli-sponsored elections? We're back with Dr. Alfred Lilienthal, and the situation in the Middle East, according to him, and I guess I'm certainly in agreement with you about this, the peace process is one big sham, one big lie. The region actually is arming. Israel's defense budget is greater this year than it was last year, and greater that year than it was the year before.
Which means a bigger hunk coming from the United States, of course. Most of it comes from us.
The Arabs continue to buy huge amounts of weapons, which I grant you and agree with you. The regimes are not planning to use it against Israel. They're planning to use it either against Iran or against their own people.
Right.
The region's really a tinderbox. Get off the hook, and you're not. We're going to talk about Yasser Arafat for our final moments. You have a sense of loyalty, I think, because...
Not for anything he ever did for me. The one thing I ever asked him for, I never got an answer. I wanted to be consultant to the Palestinian delegation to the talks. I never got an answer back.
Well, he had a man dressed, a Neturei Karta fellow dressed up in,
That was subsequent, yeah.
Neturei Karta is an anti-Zionist, religious, Hasidic sect.
Who doesn't know beans about what goes on.
About nothing.
About nothing, except... I bow to them that they are the Neturei Karta, yes. Rabbi Blau, I think his name was, or is.
Well, but I want to talk about what's happened to Yasser Arafat. If I understood your comments before, you think he was just manipulated and made a mistake with all the pressures on him, all the need for money, all the things that had happened, sort of the political shell shock he'd been living in. You think he meant well, but just got screwed. Is that?
I don't think there was any guile that he purposely went to the United States. From my 3 or 4 conversations with him, he didn't have that much of a love for any American group here. I'm guided by a feeling that a guy has done so much for his people. Shouldn't be accused of a lot of things beyond what he has really done wrong.
But would you agree that the result of what he has done is at minimum that he's become a dupe of his enemy?
No question about that.
And thus done tremendous harm to his people.
I would agree. But it's up to other people to point these out. This is the first time I've ever said anything publicly because of a sense of feeling, knowing what he's done for the movement. After Shukeri, that was the name we were looking for.
Ahmed Shukeri.
Ahmed Shukeri. He's a god.
Of drive them into the sea fame.
Yeah, of drive them into the sea. He's something else again,
But realize what you've said here. A man can have. We're not talking right now about motives. We don't know. I've met him, had dinner with him. I mean, we don't know what really makes him tick. And I've heard all kinds of stories, as I'm sure you have, about him. But in the end, a man gets judged in history by the result of his deeds.
Right.
And even if I were not to argue with you at the moment about what he's accomplished, what he did accomplish for the Palestinian people, the end result will have been that he will have stripped them of their cause and of their dignity and essentially turned them into Indians on reservations. Is that too harsh?
No, I don't think so. Gaza, Jericho, period. Nothing beyond that.
Not even Gaza, Jericho, period.
I had a big birthday 2 years ago and put out a little book summarizing things I had written, put extracts of it in that booklet, and I had a last word, and I said, I fear that the road from Gaza to Jericho is going to be a very rough one and may end into great disaster. I said that 3 years ago. I didn't place the blame anywhere. It was just a short sentence or two.
But the disaster will be for the Palestinians.
People, of course.
Not for the Israelis or the Americans.
No.
Because the bad outcome, the Israelis have gotten a situation that if Gaza, Jericho goes forward, and you have the reservations of Nablus and Hebron and Tulkarm, etc., etc.,
all
etc.
cut off by these
all
roads.
reservations.
Right.
No state, no integrity, no viability. They win because they're able to say to the world, we care so much about our Palestinians, we were even willing to negotiate with Yasser Arafat.
Sit with them.
If he is assassinated by Hamas, they then say, what can you expect from us? We've done everything we possibly could, including negotiate with the PLO, these crazy Palestinians. They've been killing each other for 100 years. Nothing we can do. If it results in another intifada and an uprising, they also say, can't trust these Palestinians, their leaders make agreements.
No matter,
What can we do? We just got to put them down.
no matter what, you can't win. That's right.
So under
And of
these...
course, we haven't talked about the Zionist lobby is one of the prime villains, but we haven't mentioned, to me, the #1 prime villain, the media.
Ah, be my guest. This is a topic dear to my heart.
The media are #1. The false information, the myth information, the non-information that they pass off, the campaigns they wage. And I fought stupidly, I guess, with so many of them, the letters that never get published.
It's not just that, the people they invite on TV, the hacks, and in some cases the jerks, but in most cases the false flags. They invite X as an independent academic or analyst. In reality, who's he really working for?
Right.
Working for the Israeli lobby, or a think tank associated with the Israeli, or for that matter, for Arab television. Because they're just, the Arab lobby is just as flacking as the Jewish lobby at this point. So tell me more about the media. You think they're the greatest enemy?
I think they are. If I could put my finger on one, they're the greatest enemy in many ways other than the Middle East. I think television is a total disaster. So
that's why we're on public access television on Mideast Realities, because no one else, look, you and I have been on national shows. During the White House ceremony you mentioned, I was doing the live commentary for Canadian national television, but not here in America.
No.
Because they didn't want analysis.
I've always found Canada much more open and less susceptible to Zionist influence, even though they have large Jewish groups in Montreal,
just
in
about
Toronto.
Every Western country.
Yeah, it's a Western, but I found them much freer. I've enjoyed myself more in my visits, which 10 or 11 times I've lectured for 2 to 3 weeks in Canada over the past years. Much freer than Americans.
But don't you think the media is also victim?
Except on the last visit to Montreal, a fellow named Rod McDonald has a show, and he accused me of being a, quote, media basher, end of quote.
Well, you are a media basher. You just called them the big enemy. But I asked you, aren't they also the victim?
When you have reason behind what you say, you're not a basher. You're a media analyst, yeah.
The real victim is the public.
Of course.
Because the public is misserved and then doesn't understand why things happen, like trade towers blowing up, like threats, like Hamas, like buses.
Doesn't relate cause to effect.
Has no way to assess and analyze the realities as opposed to the images.
Right. We live in a world of imagery, unfortunately.
But more and more, the media is victim also. The media is intimidated. The media is used. Fine. It's the job of the media to go around that and to try to bring forward different analysis. But I guess I've developed a certain sympathy meeting a lot of hosts and producers. They too, over the years, have been so misserved they don't know where to turn. In Washington, where would they turn? There's no real independent and honest think tank they can go to, is there?
No.
Not one.
Not one. I agree.
They could call Edward Said or Noam Chomsky, but none of them have any publicity departments. None of them are set up for instant access and that kind of thing. It's almost impossible for people who don't know you to find you. You're in the phone book, but I mean, there's no
I'm
think
not in
tank.
the phone book.
Excuse me. For reasons you've already
I've got
mentioned.
enough problems without being in the phone book. You would think I was in the phone
Well,
book.
I'm in the phone book. What can I say? You're watching Mideast Realities. This is Dr. Alfred Lilienthal. I'm your host, Mark Brzezinski. We've had a pretty wide-ranging, freewheeling,
I've enjoyed
honest,
it.
thoughtful discussion about history, about the current situation. Some of it may have been a bit disjointed. Some of it may be a little difficult to fully put together. Well, welcome to the Middle East. Welcome to the American way of discussing the Middle East. But most of all, thank you for tuning into this program. The purpose of this program is, as best we can, with few resources and not much help, certainly not from any of the Arab establishment or Jewish establishment organizations.
And everybody else is fearful, so you have no help from anywhere.
Well,
except yourself.
You and I both know there's a variety of thoughtful, decent, independent people. They're scattered. They're not organized. I've mentioned a few. Edward Said, a giant of a man, unfortunately very ill. Noam Chomsky. Okay, you have our differences on various things, but as an intellectual, as an analyst, as a thoughtful personality, he's one of the few guys who's published a lot more books than you have. Some of us try. There's Mohammed Sid Ahmed in Egypt. We're all part of establishments where we've all got our biases. My God, I worked for years with Jewish and Zionist organizations that I now look back on realizing
When did your When did your reawakening occur, and how?
Are you want to be guest host of this program once in a while? Huh? I know the answer to that question, and it requires personal experiences. When Issam Sertawi was assassinated, he was the PLO representative in Europe. I was thrown for a big loop. Whole nother story why, but my relationship with Muna had tremendous influence on me. I mean, here was a Palestinian woman brought up to hate Jews, brought up with Kalashnikovs in her closet, brought up in the midst of the PLO, and yet we came to realize that we had much more in common than she had with many Palestinians or I had with many Jews. I'm with you that the media have a lot of responsibility for misinforming people. We do what we can with this program. Unfortunately, public access television is not exactly something seen by millions. We are seen by thousands in many cities around the country now. And I hope that some of you watching this very minute will take a look. Our phone number appears in the credits. Give us a call. Tell us that you appreciate what we're doing. We need the support. Tell us that you want to help with what we're doing. And we'll put you on an email list or a fax list and send you some additional information. I'm your host, Mark Brzezinski, and please tune in next week on this channel, same day of the week and same time, for another episode of Mideast Realities. And thank you, Dr. Lilienthal.